Dr. Michael Lewis, orthopedic surgeon who served as president of the medical staff at North Shore University Health System, Skokies Hospital, and received a Best Teacher Award from Rush Medical School. As an award-winning author, he's published 6 books, and his most recent book is still up there on the screen. Yeah, he's going to talk about that today. He's lectured and has been interviewed both nationally and internationally. As I said, he's done 6 books, and I think you'll find his program fascinating. So if I can, Dr. Lewis, come on up.
Thank you, everyone. When Ray Meyer, a previous head coach for the DePaul Blue Demons, was 90 years old, he stated that there are 3 stages in life: youth, adulthood, and you look good. And when I look out in this audience, I'm thinking, you look good. So I'm honored to be here this morning. This is actually my 5th time to speak at this Tuesday morning venue. I talked about the Sox and the Bulls and a photographic journey of all 7 continents. But this morning, I want to share with you a book that I've been working on for the last several months. It's not published yet. It's going to be going to the publisher within this next month. So it's Getting Wiser, 101 Essential Life Lessons. And the question that I've asked 101 very accomplished people are, if you could pass on one life lesson to the next generation, what would it be? So I hope if we have a question and answer period, you might share some of your life lessons that you would like to pass on. This is Major General Will Levine. Believe it or not, he was drafted as a private and became a major general. This is Major General Will Levine when he was in World War II. He was at Normandy, and then he participated in the D-Day invasion at Normandy, and then was one of the first soldiers to go to Dachau prison camp. Major Levine is one of the 101 people in the book. His wife recently told me that he was so horrified by the experience that he didn't talk about it for 40 years, even to his family. And then someone convinced him that it was important to prevent another Holocaust. So he did. And his first talk was at Evanston High School, and he broke down and started crying uncontrollably. He then, a few years later, gave a talk at Yad Vashem, the Holocaust memorial in Israel, and a man came up to him and said, "Do you remember me?" He said, "I'm sorry, I don't." He said, "You picked me up in your arms and you carried me out of Dachau. You saved my life." So that's this incredible man, General Will Levine. Another contributor to the book is Cecilia Conrad. She's an African-American who grew up in Dallas, Texas. And she said, "My father taught me never to hate." Her father was the first Black person in Dallas, Texas to run for citywide office. He ran for the school board, and a woman came to every meeting, sat on the front row wearing Ku Klux Klan regalia for the years that he was on the school board. Finally, when he was retiring, she came up to him and said, "Dr. Conrad, I know I've been rough on you, but I know your heart's been in the right place." Thank you. Thank you, lady. So he explained to his daughter, Cecilia, that, you needed to speak up and speak out. And she said that by his example, my father taught me not to let hatred of others lose my goals. Today, Cecilia Conrad has one of the best jobs in the country. She's head of the MacArthur Foundation, and she's the one that gives the Genius Grants. So quite a family history. This next contributor to the book is Thomas Kirk. He was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam War, and he was shot down over North Korea. He was then put in the Hanoi Hilton, the terrible prison camp in North Vietnam. He was there for 6 years. He was tortured. He was in solitary confinement for 2 years, never spoke to a soul, didn't have a book, couldn't write. So one thing he did to keep, just to survive, was he practiced playing on an imaginary flute for 2 hours a day. And then when he got out of prison after 6 years, he said that he forgave his captors. He said they were fighting for a cause they believed in. I was fighting for a cause I believed in, so I forgave them. An extraordinary man. And then he went back to Vietnam to help the Vietnamese in the farming industry. One of the chapters in the book is about creativity. And I always thought that being creative meant you were a poet or you were a painter. But this man, Abraham Maslow, who I studied with in college, changed my thinking about this. And he came out with this wonderful saying: "A first-rate soup is better than a second-rate poem." And his point is that, we can all be creative. And the idea of what's creative is a much broader definition. And for example, running a business or raising a family can be done in a very creative way. And speaking of creativity, I love the story of the 4-year-old girl who tells her teacher that she's drawing a picture of God. And the teacher's response is, "Well, nobody knows what God looks like." And the girl answers, "They will in a minute." So this gentleman, Bud Frazier, he's here with another good-looking guy, is a cardiac surgeon in Houston, Texas. He's performed 1,300 heart transplants, more than anyone in the world. And he is an example of creative thinking as well as persistence. And this is a book that has been written about him. What was obvious to everyone is if when you're designing an artificial heart, the heart pumps. So you need an artificial heart that pumps. Well, that's obvious to everybody. However, the problem is that an artificial heart that pumps wears out. So it's not a permanent solution. So it was obvious to everyone except Bud Frazier, who thought there must be another way. And he has come up with a device that is a continuous flow, not pumping motion, because it's a device that doesn't wear out. And it's a brilliant concept. He's an extraordinarily creative man. This is a prototype of this device, which he hopes will actually be FDA approved and able to put into people as soon as the end of this year, and it could change the lives of millions of people who've had heart failure. This is Eli Siegel, another contributor to the book. Eli was a college roommate of mine, and he was president of the class in college, and I was vice president. My political career came to a crashing halt, but he went on to become chief of staff of Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, and was extraordinarily creative. And I'll give you an example of that. He was in charge of getting the AmeriCorps program through Congress. As many of you know, the AmeriCorps program today involves 250,000 volunteers who donate 2 years of their time and help local communities in exchange for assistance with college tuition. Well, Eli needed West Virginia Senator Robert Byrd's vote, but he couldn't get an appointment with him. And he was very friendly with Jay Rockefeller, who was the other senator from West Virginia. And so he said, Jay, you need to help me. So Jay Rockefeller's response was, Eli, I love you, but I've used up, all my chits with Senator Byrd, so I can't help you. So at that point, Eli, who grew up in Brooklyn and was a fanatic baseball fan, looked around the office and he saw pictures in Jay Rockefeller's office of baseball players from the 50s. So he said, I tell you what, Jay, I'll make a deal with you. You ask me a question about baseball in the 50s. If I get it right, you'll get me that interview. If not, I won't bother you. So Rockefeller says, okay, who was the organist at Ebbets Field? Eli, one moment where his ego got out of control, he said, this is a true story, it's documented. He said, Gladys Gooding, but that's too easy, give me another one. So then he said, okay, who were the principals in the trade when the New York Giants acquired Alvin Dark, seen here? Eli said, the Boston Braves traded Eddie Stanky along with Al Dark to the New York Giants in exchange for Sid Gordon, Buddy Kerr, Willard Marshall, and Red Webb. Eli got the meeting. Senator Byrd voted for AmeriCorps and it passed. And that's how it happened. Talk about creativity. So another chapter in the book is giving people more than they expect, because no matter who you are, there's more that can be done. And here is yours truly. And in the late 70s, I was one of the first people in the country to perform arthroscopic surgery. And I thought I was doing all the right things. I gave talks. I wrote papers. I even invented this instrument that's still widely used today. I didn't understand a little concept called patent. So my children are upset with me, understandably. But I thought I was doing everything possible, but in retrospect, I could have done more. And so my colleagues quickly caught up with me and I lost my competitive advantage. So in retrospect, what happened was that I did what Michelangelo talks about. I aimed too low and achieved my mark. So I've tried ever since then to learn from this person. You might remember this gentleman, Michael Jordan, and this person, Carlton Fisk. They were the two finest athletes that I worked with. And what's so interesting to me is that the finest athletes are the ones who work the hardest. That's just extraordinary. And for both of them, they worked harder than anyone else, both of them, and they continually set their goals higher and then followed through on those goals. Another chapter has to do with serving others and focusing beyond yourself. This is Geoffrey Tabin. Geoffrey Tabin, 30 years ago, started an organization called the Himalayan Cataract Project. Since that time, this is an astonishing figure. This organization has given sight to more than 1 million people with no charge to them. My wife and I visited Geoff Tabin in Ghana in 2007, and here he is in the operating room. This is a gentleman who'd been blind for years, and this is the very first moment when he can see for the first time in years, and the very next day after surgery. So all of the proceeds from the books that I've written, and I do have a copy here of the books just to show you, all of the proceeds go to the Himalayan Cataract Project. So I do have to admit that when I compare myself to Geoff Tabin, I really felt quite inadequate. I knew that I could never affect the lives of countless thousands of people, but then I realized that all I could do was be the best Michael Lewis I could be, and that I could follow Mother Teresa's advice. Not all of us can do great things, but we can do small things with great love. And that was really actually very helpful to me. I realized that it was not appropriate to try to compare myself to Geoff Tabin. That I tried to follow Oscar Wilde's dictum, be yourself, everybody else is already taken. To me, a really perfect example of accepting who you are is Robert Reich. Robert Reich, seen here, was President Clinton's Secretary of Labor. And I once heard him speak. He comes out onto the stage and stands in the middle of the stage by himself. He's 4 feet, 10 and a half inches tall. And his first words are, "You've probably noticed that I'm short." And it's brilliant because he immediately wins you over with his humor. Instead of, while he's talking, you're distracted by his appearance. So it's just a wonderful example of be yourself. Everybody else is already taken. So another chapter in the book has to do with the importance of relationships. There is a Harvard University study that tracked from 1938, that tracked 268 graduates, and they made a very important discovery that more than money or power or fame, it's relationships that lead to a more satisfying life. These are some friends of mine that met when we were freshmen in college, and we're still very good friends today. This is a book club that I'm in that meets every month. It's really difficult to overestimate the importance of relationships. Ron talked about North Shore Senior Center. This is really where it's at. Look around in this room. This is really such an important part of your life. And it's relationships, more than money, more than power, more than prestige. That's where it's at. So I would say that for the North Shore Senior Center, This isn't the icing on the cake. This is the cake. And finally, another chapter in the book has to do with maintaining perspective. Many of us in the past 2 years especially have felt like this rodeo rider. So it's easy to forget that life is 10% what happens to you, but you do have a choice of how you can respond. And to me, a really profound example of that is Christopher Reeve, seen here, who played Superman in the movies. You can't get much more macho than this. But as some of you know, Christopher Reeve fell off a horse and became paralyzed from the neck down. And something that I think about just about every day is Christopher Reeve's saying, when I look at people getting out of a chair, I think, you don't realize how lucky you are to be able to do that. So it's just a really powerful reminder of the importance of keeping things in perspective. This is my mother celebrating her 104th birthday. And she would, every day, she would say, I'm grateful, I can be grateful. So in conclusion, there are a lot of studies that show that this is the good news, that our level of satisfaction actually increases as we get older. We're better at savoring. We appreciate small pleasures. We're present for those small pleasures. We hold on to joyful experiences. We know our time's limited, so we spend it more wisely. So as Mark Twain said, one good piece of advice is endeavor to live so that when we come to die, even the undertaker will be sorry. He also said, when he was asked about heaven and hell, he said, actually, I'm going to keep my options open because I have friends in both places. So many of us have been blessed with a life enriched beyond our wildest dreams. Each of us are still a work in progress. So full speed ahead. Let's continue to hope, to tell stories, to serve, and to love. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. We're going to take any questions that first come from the auditorium.
Dr. Lewis, that was wonderful, inspiring stories.
Thank you.
And things we can inspire too. I was struck by the first story on the General Levine going into Dachau to help in the liberation. A little over a year ago, we did a presentation on the Japanese American soldiers who also went into Dachau. It was a sprawling death camp, as you probably know. And the Americans went in one side, but the Japanese American soldiers went in another area of Dachau and helped liberate that camp. So I was struck by that and just wanted to mention it.
While we're looking for others that may come from Zoom, I have a comment to make about my mom, who also passed at almost 103. And basically her lifestyle that she taught, and our father died relatively young in his 50s of tuberculosis. But mom, her glass was more than half full. And we very much took to heart the comment that I think she would tell us that success is getting what you want, but happiness is wanting what you get. And we looked at it that way. So I think that was pretty positive. I have a question. And let me read what I put in chat, because it's more asking about motivation. The great people you knew all wanted to make a difference. Do you feel they primarily were doing so to help the world be a better place, or just to kind of further their own ego? Did you run into both, or how did you feel about them?
Abraham Maslow invented the concept of self-actualization. And what he did was that he studied the people in this world that you and I would most admire. And he found that universally, these people were dedicated to a cause greater than themselves. And when I think of Eli Siegel and I think of Geoff Tabin, these are heroic people. Actually, each of the people that I mentioned are heroic. And I don't think it's either or. I think that their main focus is on making the world better. Certainly, you have to have a certain confidence in your own ability that you can do that. But in each of these people, in my experience, ego would be secondary.
Thank you, Doctor. Another comment before we get a question from the auditorium. From Bob Bloom on Zoom. As director of the then Jewish Children's Bureau, I made our motto, our philosophy: to save a child is to save the whole world. All successful professionals transmit their knowledge and skills via a strong, positive relationship with their clients, patients, etc. That's Bob's comment.
One more.
One question.
Okay.
Would you say those people
Wait,
that
can we get a response first from the doctor on the comment?
Oh, I was just going to say that your comment about optimism. There have been many studies that show that that optimistic people live longer. And another interesting thing about optimism is that it's been found to have a genetic component. My mother, like your mother, was an optimist. I'm fortunate enough to be an optimist. And if you're an optimist, you think it's going to happen, so you put more energy into making it happen. So it's a positive quality. However, in my case, I've been optimistic that some of the investments I made were going to work out. So I think naivete would be more the correct word in that case.
would you say the pictures we saw and the people in your book are the happiest people you know?
That's a very interesting question. I would say that very much so. The people who are serving others and have a sense of purpose feel better about themselves than other people.
Doctor, is another one from Zoom, Karen Jacobson, that might be an extension of what you just said. Karen is asking, how do we become heroes? What personality characteristics does it take?
That's a wonderful question. Part of the idea of this, I would say the answer is buy this book. Because that's actually the point of the book, to try to answer that question, to look at people who are heroes, the Major General Will Levines, the Thomas Kirks, the Geoffrey Tabins, and to be inspired by their example. But there's so many qualities. just leading a life of integrity, of finding a purpose, of understanding who you are, as we said, accepting yourself, and then trying to be your best self.
Morgan is saying, yeah, go ahead, please.
I discovered and found out that many people had discovered a quotation from Pablo Picasso that the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to share that gift. And I personally would substitute the word love. To find the meaning of life is to find love, and the purpose of life is to share that love. Because I feel that, this is all personal opinion, that people who have love, who give love, are the happy people, and people who never experience that are the bitter people. But also, I'm saying this to a heart surgeon, but I think that love doesn't come from the heart, it comes from the brain.
Would it be all right if you'd be my co-author on this book?
I wanted to share a story going back about 60 years ago in Manhattan. And a friend of mine, David Greenfeld, and his father had a small garment district production company there. And they had enough business to have a bookkeeper. And the bookkeeper was in his 70s, and his name was Mr. Horowitz. And I became fond of him. He was helping me with my little taxes and things like that. But I always looked forward to seeing him. One day I said to him, "Mr. Horowitz, how are you?" And he stopped and he looked up, and he had on his little classic plastic transparent thing and the rolled up sleeves. And he said, "Jim, with the things that are really important, I'm terrific." Thank you.
So one other point I would make, just to amplify the idea of being yourself. There's several people in this book who have overcome significant adversity. There are two people in the book that were in prison and turned their lives around, or started from very difficult circumstances. One of them, in fact, since we have a World Baseball Authority here, Mr. Ed Stone, was Ron LaFleur, who had committed crimes and was in prison in the Detroit area, and started playing baseball when he was in prison. He didn't play when he was younger, and had such talent that the Detroit Tigers scouted him, and he became an all-star player. And I knew him when I was with the Chicago White Sox, and he was very respectful, and he clearly realized how fortunate he was. So it's not just people who restore sight to millions of people. It's where each of us start from and how far we come from where we started.
A couple more comments from Zoom. W. Morgan is saying, "Thank you, extremely inspiring, great info to share, present to kids in grammar and high schools. This is a very difficult time to be growing up." And tied to that, Bob Bloom adds, "I used to regularly get asked, how can I deal with all the awful things that happen to children? My response was, if I could get them onto this little island called JCB, I could do whatever was necessary to help." And both of those comments kind of trigger in my mind this big divide that we have in America. And I mean, if you could comment on how we don't seem to be able to maybe just look at ourselves and use our gifts and then see gifts in others. But we're so ready to be able to see things that we can point to and say, aha, look at how terrible that is. I mean, it seems like the negative has consumed the positive.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This is not our finest moment in our country's history, but there's again maintaining perspective. I think about my mother's life. During my mother's life, there was the pandemic in 1919 that killed 50 million people. There was World War I, there was World War II, there was the Holocaust, there were other wars. So this may not, for us, in our narrow perspective, may not seem like our finest moment, but we've been through terrible traumas before, and we can rise again.
I have a comment. I'm a clinical social worker, and one of the things that I found in doing therapy, especially in domestic violence cases and child abuse situations, were helping couples who were having difficulty, was to share the gift of appreciation, of noting, even if it was one thing that they appreciated that their spouse had done or that their child had done that day, that they could note and be especially appreciative of, and calling attention to it with the child or with the spouse, and turning around their situation so that they were calling attention to it and relishing in that moment of appreciation for what they appreciated of the other person. And that really helped to turn around quite a few marriages and child relationship situations in my clinical work.
Thank you. Well, just to expand on that, there's a well-known John Goffman is a well-known student of relationships, and he studied thousands of married couples. And he came up with an extraordinarily simple formula, which is called the 5-to-1 ratio. And it's saying, and he found that in relationships, if you say 5 positive things to your significant other to 1 negative, the relationship has a very good chance of being successful. And it can be very small things. So that's to amplify what you're
from Bob.
saying.
Yep. A couple of things. It deals with perspective. How many of you know who Wayne Thiebaud is? Anybody? Okay. All right. He's been featured on CBS Sunday Morning a couple of times. He's an artist, very, very successful artist, who became famous making paintings of pies and cakes. That's all he did. But he said something in terms of how he was presenting his work, and I used it as a signature on my email, and I resurrected it from time to time, but he said, if we don't have a sense of perspective, if we don't have a sense of humor, we don't have a sense of perspective. That's the first one. But the other one is a little exercise for you to try. I have a lot of fun with this, and you find out very quickly if somebody does have a sense of humor. And it's always in casual settings. Say if you're going through the checkout at the grocery store, or I mean, no matter where, you're going to encounter people who will say, "Hi, how are you today?" And you go, "What have you heard?" And that is a great icebreaker. And again, you find out very quickly if someone has a sense of humor or not, but it's a lot of fun. Try it. I've been doing it for years, and it's very interesting to see the responses I get.
in the book, I'll tell you two stories briefly as far as relating to humor. One was Bill Veeck, who was the owner of the White Sox and who had a marvelous sense of humor that got him through many situations. One was he was the owner of the St. Louis Browns, and at the time they had the lowest attendance in the league. So someone one day called the box office, and Bill Veeck, the owner, answered the phone, and they said, "We'd like to come to the game on Sunday afternoon. What time does the game start?" So Bill Veeck said, "How many in your party?" And they said 6. So Bill said, "Well, what time would be convenient for you?" Another story that I love is there was a father and son team who built a sailboat and sailed around the world together. It was just the two of them. So they were together 24/7. And they had one rule, which they called Big Rule Number 1, which is if you're going to laugh about it in 6 months, you may as well start now. And it's a wonderful rule that I use almost every day.
Yes. My little story is called the 10% factor. In about 5th grade, I had a particularly motivational teacher. And she got me thinking to work harder to do better. And I tried that and it worked. And I said, if I'm going to do this study, I might as well put in the extra hours to do the best. And I did, and ended up at the top of the class. A few years later, I went through college, and then I was in the Navy. I went on the ship, and I was an ensign, and I was assigned a certain responsibility. And they were looking for me to give a summary situation. Well, I put in a lot of extra effort, which to me was putting in an extra 10% effort. And the officers, upper level officers, were very impressed with this additional work that wasn't required but was done. And as a result, I got promoted quicker than I would have been otherwise. Fast forward 20 years, I have 4 grandchildren, and starting when they were 3 or 4 years old, I taught them about 10%. I want to see you kids put in that 10%, and it will make a big difference. And it has made a big difference. So at this point, they're 25 years old. And I say, are you doing the 10%? Oh, Poppy, don't say that. Because, to them, they think back when I was pressing them to put in that extra effort. It paid off.
Well, 10% compounded annually adds up.
Just one comment that somebody that I kind of use frequently, and that is, if you can't laugh at yourself, you miss all the fun because everybody else is.
There's a joke from Zoom. We've got Mark telling us, Mark Fine, reminding us that that Ray LaFleur, even when he got out of prison, he was stealing bases.
That's right. That's right.
We have one more from the auditorium.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, for a good presentation. I was struck by the comment you said that optimists or people with an optimistic outlook live longer. I'm sure that comment struck particularly importantly to this audience. But anyway, it made me think of a story. a man named Viktor Frankl. I don't know if you're aware of him, but his story was he was a survivor of Auschwitz, and he wrote a book or a story. And what he outlined was that those people that seemed to have an inner strength, a communication, I don't know if you want to call it optimism, faith, or some kind of characteristic that separated themselves from the other inmates, survived, and then those that lacked it did not. So I guess the question I have is, number one, could you elaborate on the term optimism, what it means to you, and how to expand on it? And number two, was the story of Viktor Frankl, do you think, sort of expression of an example of the same kind of a concept which you were talking about?
Well, Viktor Frankl, and I do talk about him in my book, his Man's Search for Meaning. He talks about love, and that thinking about how much he loved his wife and his family, just having that concept in his mind and having a purpose is what sustained him. So it's slightly different than optimism, but the importance of meaning and purpose is something that comes out, again, that's focusing beyond yourself. And I think that's what Viktor Frankl was talking about. As far as optimism and that's a very good question about how to expand. One way that literally every self-help book that you've ever read talks about gratitude and expressing gratitude. And my mother was way ahead of the curve when for the last 60 years, has said, I'm grateful I can be grateful. One thing, very personally, I literally every day try to think of 3 things to be grateful for that day that I wasn't, new things to be grateful for. And then also to perform random acts of kindness just to express, thanks for those gifts. So I think thinking about gratitude, it would be one piece of that equation.
I will turn it over. Doctor, that was a wonderful talk. It was very inspiring. We look forward to your new book.
Thank you.
We'll turn it back to Bob to end our meeting.
So just I've brought this before, and they were very popular. The price is right. They're free. These are posters that your grandchildren are likely to love from the time for the bulls. So help yourself if you are interested. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.